I'd say we are on episode 16, Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered.
Yes, sir.
So we just wanted to get on here and chat about what's going on this week. Nothing really, no deep dives prepared, but Friday's always a good time going into a holiday weekend here in the United States. It's Memorial Day. Ramon, can you give me some facts on Memorial Day? What's it about? The fallen?
I'm not a holiday person, so I don't look into them. I only know about things that I care about, and holidays are not one of them. I'm very Bernie Sanders-esque in that regard. Gift card industry can die tomorrow. Don't care. If I know you and like you, I'll say happy birthday. Other than that, nope. I'm
I like days off. I like holidays, but again, the meaning of Memorial Day, I believe, is for fallen. It's just an American holiday, and it's for the
yeah, yeah.
fallen military. What's the difference between?
I think Veterans Day is for active, alive people who are alive. If I'm not mistaken,
Okay,
Memorial Day is
for
only
the
for fallen
fallen.
soldiers. I know a little bit about it. I just don't care, to go into any, and not just Memorial Day specifically, just like all
Right.
holidays. But
No
that's just
offense,
me.
Memorial Day, but
Yeah, I'm just a cranky guy,
bah
you
humbug.
know.
Okay, yeah. So we're just going to riff a little bit today, talk about what we've seen and what's been popping up. What do you got for me, Ramon? Come on, I know you got a good first.
All right. Do you want to do the Clyburn video? I actually have it transcribed if you just want me to read the quotes.
Yeah, just read the quote.
Okay, I got that. So right here, folks, let's just hop right into, just dovetails nicely with what we've talked about, Israel, Palestine, and we're just seeing a little bit of, just doing some media analysis. Was looking through some things, something jumped out at me, and just thought it was hilarious. Wanted to share it with Pat or everyone else here. So I think it was 10 days ago. A gentleman named Charles Blow was
Great
interviewing
name,
Jim
by the way.
Clyburn.
Sorry.
Yeah, awesome name. Curtis Blow. Anybody? Go listen. One of the classics, classic artists. But yeah, so Charles Blow on BNC News was interviewing Jim Clyburn and was asking him some questions on Israel Palestine. And Charles Blow goes, quote, "Do you believe that Israel is committing human rights violations or that the blame is equally distributed?" He was citing civilian casualties and other things of that nature. And Jim Clyburn's response was, quote, "I think the violence needs to come to an end. Whoever is perpetrating the violence, it needs to come to an end. I do believe that this situation is far beyond what the eyes may see. I have not studied it. I've seen some headlines. I don't know. I'm not a specialist on foreign affairs, and I tend to stay out of it. So I have no idea." End quote. Patter just saw this live, like
10
10
minutes
minutes
ago.
ago. Give me the react, because mine's yours been marinating here.
Well, I struggled for words for about 30 seconds at the thought of uh, absolute dinosaur in government. He's been there, 30, 40 years. Now he's in a very powerful position that he can't categorically say that civilian casualties in the Israeli-Palestine conflict is not something he can condemn. But it's also amazing that he can say that he hasn't studied it much when, America has given $5+ billion a year to Israel for defense. So yeah, that was my reaction. That's what I said to Ramon. I was like,
I mean, if for me, it set off like the fucking the Kill Bill, like the alarm bell, because it was like, this is wrong in so many different ways. Like, all right, let's even give him let's be extremely charitable here. He's an APAC guy, like most of Democratic Party leadership, right? So he obviously isn't gonna like have some hot take on Israel Palestine. Like we can be realistic and know that he was never gonna answer this the way that me or Patter would have wanted him to in the first place,
right.
right? But the fact that he just like, I mean, and you have to give some credit for the honesty. I hope it's honesty. I quote, "I have no idea." So how the fuck are you in leadership in the House of Representatives of America, one of the most fiddling foreign policy nations in the world,
Yeah.
talking about, "I don't know anything about Israel"?
He's Ray Charles to the bullshit.
So this should just be like automatic disqualification, folks. This makes him no different than Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. or any of these other just dipshit people you find on the
Oh,
right that have no idea about anything having to do with foreign policy. And he just came right out and said it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. So that was the first thing that popped in my head. The second thing that popped in my head was this just shows, like, again, we've discussed this before on previous episodes, like how far gone American politics is from the concept of, like, Congress is supposed to be the deliberative body when it comes to, like, declaring war. And typically part of declaring war is like you have to know foreign policy. You can't just be like, oh, I don't like this guy now, so I'm going to war. Like, no, you have to know the intricacies, the internal dynamics of a country. So again, it just shows like how lazy they get to be, where presidents, the executive has usurped that responsibility of Congress to the point where now you have a person in House leadership, the number 2 person in the House, just literally being like, yeah, I don't know, who cares?
right.
Like basically just like, yeah, whatever, violence needs to stop. Like he's talking about, like like Charleston, South Carolina, like a gang shooting or something. Like it's on that level. Like it was just normal people like fighting over money or something. Not a genocide.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
I'm not surprised, but I'm also like, whoa. And as I said to you when I saw first, I've seen that version of that question being asked a few times, and it's a fairly simple answer, but they people defending what Israel is doing and just the inconsequential acts that's happening there. They don't know how to answer. They can't give it a basic answer, which just lets you know all you need to know with that.
yeah.
Oh, speaking of crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene, did you see they did like an America First rally with her and Matt Gaetz in Georgia yesterday?
No, I didn't
They
see
said some
that. What
crazy
happened?
things. Yeah,
Naturally.
so Matt Gaetz started talking about he was talking about Silicon Valley. And he basically said, if they're not going to let us participate, well, we have a Second Amendment for a reason.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
People were saying, well, it's kind of inciting what we saw on March 6th or on January 6th. And then Marjorie Taylor Greene got up and spoke, and she was talking about, there's a little thing in colleagues I work with called the Squad. I like to call them the Jihad Squad. It's literally, she took like a, and
Oh
she
no.
was talking like someone that we've all seen. You've seen that girl who's like, let me tell you about something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah, no, and yeah, that's what Marjorie said. She gives off strong, like
oh
towny
yeah,
mom at the
yeah,
bar who's just like already hammered. Like you got out of
yeah,
work, it's like 5 o'clock. She's already hammered at the corner of the
yep.
bar.
That's her
Like that's
energy.
like that's her total
That's her energy.
vibe.
You don't want to mess with her, but at the same time, you know that she'll be on her ass by 11 o'clock drunk. So
Oh yeah, and that's the thing, like, right? We talked about it like last week. Like she for sure, like all this saga of her like stalking AOC and other squad members in the house, like she could definitely scrap. Like I'd be worried about AOC. Like we need to get Cory Bush in here. Let's get the gloves on,
yeah.
folks. Let's get some other young lightning, some other some some soldiers in the Democratic Party here
Yeah.
that came. Look, Cory Bush looks like she could whip some
I
ass.
think there should be that would help a lot. I think if there was allowed people to be able to duke it out, no guns,
Yeah,
just
what
like one
they
on
used
one.
to. Yeah, they used to have duels
They
and shit,
should
bro.
bring back
Like
the jewels. That's what I say.
well, and that's the problem. Like, right, we've talked about before. Like, politics is as much as like, especially establishment Democrats keep trying to keep up the facade that this isn't blood sport, and the Republicans are just reveling in it.
Oh yeah,
It's honestly a part of the only. It's the only reason they even like have any real position in their. It's because they have a bunch of bloodthirsty people in their base that love that shit, right?
right.
So you know what? Give them what they want. Come on, folks. Let's erect the Coliseum somewhere in D.C. You know what I
But
mean? Let's have
the
some gladiator games.
dynamic of that happening yesterday, and I'll pull it up here while we're talking. But the dynamic of that happening, this America First rally, and with Matt Gaetz and that craziness. Paul Ryan then speaking yesterday. Did you see that? Where
No, he's out of the woods.
yeah, he
I haven't
emerged from
seen
his
Paul Ryan
bunker.
talk in years, bro.
But he was basically a rebuke of what's going on with it, where he was talking about we should not allow one person or one ideology shape this party. Basically, talking of which is rich coming from, the fellow who fanned the flames of the Tea Party and got us kind of where we are today.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I caught yesterday and had a laugh at before I kind of.
I'm mad I missed that now. Paul Ryan, huh? I hadn't seen he's definitely in that Cheney wing right now, if he did exist in the Republican Party still. I caught I've been watching more Axios now because since you've been you were talking about it a lot, and I was like, all right, I'll give it another shot because I kind of fell off of it for a little while. Because whenever there's elections going on, they get a little too close to the Democratic Party for me. But they had Bernie on, and Jonathan Swan did a great job with that. And I saw Did you see the Liz Cheney interview?
Yeah.
What she was so she's positioning herself as like, oh, the insurrection was wrong, and a lot of the same stuff you're saying Paul Ryan said, where like we need to get back to fiscal responsibility, all the playing the hits basically of the Republican Party. Hits. And then Swan's like, okay, but like, what about all this voter law legislation that like all these red states are just blitzing out right now out of state houses? And she just pivots back to the same bullshit, which is like, oh, well, only people who can vote should vote. And, it's a problem. Right. You have to look into each state and the legislation put forward. And it's like, okay, so folks, like you can't sit there and take some stance where, no, the election wasn't stolen. If there was any voter fraud, it was insignificant. This is ridiculous. Donald Trump's a monster. And then immediately pivot into just completely legitimizing the legislative push of what came from the insurrection. Mm-hmm. So as much as like you see liberal media giving lionizing Liz Cheney in this regard, like she's still very much, go watch that interview.
Yeah,
like,
Jonathan Swan pressed her too. He brought it back a couple of times.
Oh yeah, he laughed in her face a couple times.
He did, and she looked visibly embarrassed with her answers almost.
She should be. And you know what? I'll at least give her credit for going on, because that's an untenable position. You can't walk that tightrope.
Yeah.
It's just, what are you doing?
So, off the back of that, this is what... So, Trump already fired back at Paul Ryan on Friday. This is in The Hill. Fired back at former House Speaker Paul Ryan after a speech in which Ryan criticized Trump's continued grip on the Republican Party. In a statement issued through his leadership political action committee, Save America, Trump hammered Ryan as a rhino, a Republican in name only, and blamed him and Senator Romney for costing Republicans the White House nearly a decade ago.
Is he talking about McCain? He's talking about McCain?
Yeah, no, Romney. He goes, Paul Ryan has been a curse to the Republican Party, Trump said. He has no clue as to what needs to be done for our country, was a weak and ineffective leader, and spent all of his time fighting Republicans as opposed to Democrats, who are destroying our country. Yeah.
That's it? No nicknames? No insults? That's it?
No, he goes, if the conservative cause depends on the populist appeal of one personality or second-rate imitations, then we're not going anywhere, Ryan said in a clear reference to Trump.
Right. Well, so that's interesting to see him come out. So somebody definitely put some money in his pocket for him to get back out and be doing that. Do you know what has he been doing? Like, is he lobbying? Did he start a consulting firm?
Well, he works within Fox behind the scenes.
Oh, I was gonna say I haven't seen him. Okay, so he's all right. Well, I was gonna say he always was lauded as like a wonk, like he was like a policy guy. That was how the Republican Party like tried to brand him for years. Never really saw him write any policy. Never saw him bring anything to the House floor. But that's how they tried to make him out to be.
Well, there was aspirations for him to possibly be a good presidential candidate for them.
Yeah, but he's not vicious enough. You have to be a monster. That's proven. Like, you look at, like you just named, like Romney, McCain. And McCain was close. McCain probably would have won if it wasn't for Palin, maybe, because probably not.
No,
Obama was extremely popular. But that's the thing. McCain didn't whip up the hogs enough. That's really,
He was too good of a nice guy during the actual presidential run, but.
Right. And Romney messed up because he kept trying to dodge like all the attacks of like, oh, I'm not that rich. Like, no, he should have leaned into it like Trump did.
Yeah.
He should have leaned into it and been like, yeah, I'm rich. I'll bitch. I'll burn your house down and give you cash right now. What's up? Like,
Let's do it.
like,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's cool. I love that. I want more Paul Ryan. I used to love making fun of Paul Ryan.
Bring back Paul Ryan.
Yeah, bring him back. Some of these guys are just you. There's only so much laughter to be had at the expense of people foaming at the mouth in the Republican Party. You got to have some of these guys like like old Ted Cruz, like these guys trying to fashion themselves as like, oh, I'm of the Republican intelligentsia.
Oh, Ted Cruz, I
Like
hate him so much.
yeah, they're the most fun to mock because it's like your whole ideology is incoherent and has no logic.
Bro, it's a mockery
Yeah.
though of the United States. It's not just one party that it even holds. His flip flopping and his personality has held weight for so long.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
I definitely think that he'll face a decent run the next time he has to run against somebody.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? This makes me think. I love that we're on this just like floating around Republican figurehead. I saw so Marco Rubio in Florida. The you want to talk about the prodigal son? Like Paul Ryan? No, Marco Rubio was their guy for a
Little
long time.
Marco.
They were manicuring that man, and Trump decimated him. Trump ended Marco Rubio's political career in one cycle. The Republican Party had been, raised him from a seedling, put fertilizer all in his bed, watered him every night. He was growing, folks. And then Trump just came in and mowed the lawn and was like, no, not happening. So what's interesting with him, he's coming up for reelection. He's up in 2022, right? So there was a bunch of threats from his right of people possibly primarying him, but those got quashed. I think probably because his war chest is probably going to be insane. Florida Senate Republicans always get insane amounts of money. But there's a Democrat, Val Demings,
That one
from
with the raspy
Florida.
voice.
Yeah, she's gonna run against him, and she's a former police chief, so she's actually been hitting
Woman
him
of
pretty
color
hard in the
too, right?
media. Yeah, yep. She's been hitting him pretty hard in the media, and it's been interesting to see. Like, I've seen a bunch of press hits of Marco Rubio, and typically like he's been trying to like play that like, oh, I want to do immigration reform, like, oh, I'm a nice Republican, but it's got to be fair. Well, he tried to do that whole game like, or very Romney-esque.
Right.
And then the primary happened, and he just fell flat on his face because Trump just dunked on him. But now he's full in, he's all in. To me, he is the bellwether right now for it's absolute proof that no one will attempt to run outside of Trump's his magnetism, his gravitational pull. Rubio's going full on. He just went full in. The interview I just watched, he was on there talking about, it was on Fox. He was talking about cultural Marxism and all. He's doing all the typical bullshit right-wing talking point stuff, trying to just be like, yo, look at me. I'm a vicious right-winger too. I'm not that nice guy you remember from 4 years ago that Trump dragged across the stage. So another interesting pivot, something for people to check out. A little
Also,
laughter.
Isn't it indicative of how deep the rot is in the Republican Party and the remnants of Trump that you have, statements like that and instances of that, but also the vote that was just had on the January 6th commission, the 9/11 Snyder commission they want to do on that. You think of all those, and even Mitch McConnell after it, flat out said that if it wasn't for, then it wouldn't have. If it wasn't for Trump, he doesn't think there would be an insurrection, right?
Right.
But he still was around whipping people up. Reported in the papers that he was asking for favors for them to vote against the January 6th. So what does that tell you? Why is he doing that?
Yeah.
Again, it's an instance of how deep the rot is in that, where you have
Right.
people like Paul Ryan coming out. You have it's going to be tough, and I think I would say Paul Ryan and the like, who are trying to pivot away from Trump, would be the reason that the party would sustain in its current form, or like at least try to reinvigorate themselves with more 21st century ideas instead of this like America first, isolationist Trump style. And it's going to end up decapitating itself.
And so this is really interesting, right? So like my personal analysis on this, so like now that you're telling me like that Paul Ryan, that's significant in my opinion. We talked about it in like I think it was like episode 3, the Trump, the Republican Civil War. We
Right.
brought it up briefly as a quick hit. This is groundbreaking. Like this is typically the Republican Party for my whole lifetime, extremely donor driven. So is the Democratic Party. Like let's keep it real. But there was always like a very synchronized robotic movement toward what donors wanted in the Republican Party. And now, like, I've certainly never seen it. And I can't really think of any time prior to, maybe Nixon or Reagan, I'm sorry.
Right.
Like Trump is their Reagan now. Like we're having this is a literal battle between like the money, the moneyed interests and donors of the Republican Party who are trying to get, like that's what you see in Paul Ryan. That's what you see in, your Romney-esque type people, your Liz Cheney's. They're clearly acting not just on behalf of their donors, but for their own, because they've locked themselves in. They have no choice now. They set themselves up in opposition to Trump, or at the very least, not accepting of Trumpism. And you continue to see Trump trying to hold control. And so far, you look at public policy polling, I think it's like 50% of Republicans still believe the election was stolen.
Yeah.
It really hasn't receded too much. So this is a really pivotal moment for the Republican Party and something that people should pay attention to, because especially for Democrats, because
Right.
Democrats are reactive to the Republican Party. They are not proactive.
Right.
They are completely reactive. And so that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see play out, how this power struggle continues on near the midterms. Because if Trump starts coming out and endorsing people and fucking campaigning, it's going to get messy. There's going to be some sparks flying. But I just want to touch on real quick and pivot back to what you were saying about the January 6th inquiry. I gave this a lot of thought. We talked about this a couple days ago. I think that, as frustrating as it can seem on its face, that, because me and you, Pat, are like, we're honest people, right? Like, we know that was a clear wrong that was done. You want to see some accountability. You know what I mean? Like any honest person who is not really like attempting to just view it through a completely partisan lens is like, yeah, that was fucked up and it should be looked at. It was a severe moment in American history where, democracy was attempted to be threatened for the first time in an outward way, a visible way,
Right.
something we all watched unfold and happen on live television, right?
Yeah.
And more so than anything, I think just the actual shaking of the concept of democracy was even bigger than what we actually saw on the corporal plane. Like just the ideal of it being threatened in that regard, I think is a world shaking thing for a lot of people. But on a political level, like my take, to keep it completely 100, I think Democrats should breathe a sigh of relief that if this doesn't happen, this inquiry, it's probably better off. Like, let's look at the track record here, right? Let's look at the Mueller report. Let's look at any type of thing of this type that Democrats have attempted to launch in the past. Democrats just don't have the sauce to do this shit. They can't pull off a Benghazi. You know what I mean? They can't pull off. I just don't think they can.
They don't.
And honestly, like if there was any way that there could be actual result out of this, where like, oh, we're gonna make it so Trump can't run again for president, like some concrete thing that came out of the insurrection investigation, then sure. But for the most part, like if you're going to try to play it on a political angle, which is what Democratic strategists are doing, and which is why they wanted to do it, is because we're rolling into the midterms. They want to beat up on the Republican Party by holding this investigation. I understand that. But they're not being realistic. Like Democrats, every time Democrats do something like this, it reverses on them. They don't win any public policy points off of this shit. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because of who the people, because first off, who's watching that? Who's tuning into like, C-SPAN and watching that shit? It's Democrats. Okay. So you're already speaking to an audience that agrees with you, first of all. Second off, even if the media writes about it a little bit, I have this theory, and I think it's pretty proven out over time, that whenever Democrats try to harp on these types of things where it's like, oh, we're going to do this investigation and there were all these things, blah, blah, blah. Republicans thrive off of that shit. They fundraise. They're just better at messaging. I think moving forward, a better strategy might just be let them scream about Dr. Seuss into the abyss. Let them cry about Silicon Valley and Twitter and Facebook, and just stop engaging with them and do policy. Like, let's try that for a change. I don't see, I've never seen any real political effect from any of these investigations unless they were done by Republicans. Like, it's clear they destroyed Hillary Clinton's public perception with Benghazi. They're very good at these things. I don't know what it is. And it's probably just because their base is more ready and accepting to just be like, yeah, these people are all monsters. You know, the liberals tend to be much more understanding and being like, oh, well, you know what? I think McCarthy, he did say some things at the beginning, and now, you know, he's trying to play politics. We're being cerebral about it. These investigations and the public policy polling that you want to get out of them, you want an emotional response. You don't want people who are like watching the whole hearing and then being like, oh, well, here's my value judgment based off of this, and then reading New York Times articles. That's already going to happen. So I don't know. I feel like these things always backfire. So,
I mean,
if it doesn't happen, it might be a good thing.
Well, I think the issue is you kind of named a couple of them already. The amount of Republicans who believe the big lie, who at the same time believe that, you know, you've had people who are in government there talking about how most of them look like tourists on January 6th. You know, I think regardless, there's going to be investigations, whether it's going to be a commission style or other, mechanisms that Schumer can use in order to still do the same thing. The fact that it doesn't get its own commission is something that the Democrats can use as a way to say, like, look what you guys did. Look what you guys won't even vote on. You're already seeing it right now. They didn't get the votes. You had dissenters within the Republican parties like Murkowski and Collins, the usual. But again, it just speaks more to what we're talking about here with the infighting and the identity of it. I mean, we could do a fucking episode each week on how the Republican Party is kind of, killing itself from the inside. But I think when you talk about the party itself, but when you talk about the voters, the people who are believing all this stuff, they're, if nothing, getting stronger. You know what I mean? They're really coalescing around these dumb Q messages, around, culture wars, all of that. So, yeah, it's a precarious time. And I think beyond that, what you're seeing with the filibuster being used and abused, one side seems to be playing obstructionist politics. As usual, it seems to be the Republicans and Mitch McConnell. But how dangerous is it that they use the filibuster for something like this, which, I think the world saw. There's images, there's, officers who got hurt, supposedly the law and order, lovers, and they can't even get a commission into the second time it's been attacked since the civil first time it's been attacked since the Civil War. I think that...
And that was actually... Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think the irony of all of this is funny if it wasn't so dangerous.
For sure. I was going to say real quick, that was actually a talking point Val Demings has been launching at Marco Rubio, where she was like, she tweeted it the other day. She was like, don't talk about how you support the police, but won't do the January 6th investigation. And then she was putting clips of police being beaten.
Right.
Which, hey, I mean, that's got quite the rhetorical flair. I mean, that's, it's kind of true, man. Like, and it's, I love that you just mentioned the filibuster, because this was actually, as much as we talked about it, like we did a whole big chunk of an episode on it. We broke it down. We talked about how it was a hurdle that needed to be cleared. It is almost June, folks. We still haven't had any movement or confirmation of what anyone in Democratic Party leadership is going to do about this. And interestingly enough, that was the first time the filibuster has even been used this year. I know it seems like it's like Republicans are constantly, because remember, if you remember back on that episode, we explained it, that just the threat of the filibuster is typically enough for the opposite, the party that is being filibustered, to not even present it to the floor. And especially in Democrats' case, because Democratic strategists are always concerned about, oh, well, we don't want to put something out there and then make it seem like, oh, it got filibustered now, and then if we try it again
Oh,
next year and it gets filibustered again, it gives it the stench as if it's like a failed policy.
yeah.
And the thing is, it's like, okay, but that's under the rubric of trying to stay within this box you put yourself in with the parliamentarian and all these other things. Like,
One
that's not how it needs to be. You know what I mean? Like,
one
there.
second though. Just listen to this crazy stat.
Okay.
So 54 senators who voted for the January 6th commission represent 87 million more Americans than the 35 GOP senators who blocked it.
Oh yeah.
You know, and when you look at it from that purview, and how is it really representation
Well,
when they
Patter,
can just blindly use
Patter, we
that?
live in a republic. We're not in a democracy. Any libertarian will tell you that. This isn't a democracy.
Yeah,
We live in a republic, a representative republic, and the fact that some citizens' votes count 4x more than others is how it's supposed to be.
that's
So
insane.
there you go.
54 yes votes for the 1/6 commission represent 191 million Americans, 57% of the population. 35 no votes represent 104 million. This is not how democracy is supposed to work.
No,
Not at
not in the
all.
sense of what people try to, and that's the thing, right? Like whenever we get in these silly little you know, language debates over, oh, well, this is what the country's actually is in the documents and blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, but that's not how we use it rhetorically.
No.
It's not how we use it when we talk about democratic, small d democratic rhetoric in our political system. We talk about it as if it's like one man, one vote. One man, one vote. When you go to the federal level, that's just not the case.
No.
Even when you go to the House of Representatives, it's not the case. Gerrymandering's wildly out of control. The Senate is the most undemocratic body
Oh,
in the
it's
world.
broken. It's
In the
anti-democratic.
world. Yeah, completely. The most undemocratic body. The only thing that could possibly be more undemocratic than the United States Senate is like, I don't know, like a theocratic, like religious leader. Like I can't imagine, because even monarchs aren't even really a thing
No,
anymore.
they're
Like
just dignitary.
yeah, exactly. So it's so frustrating to hear that stupid bullshit. Just like people having like, this is the same thing we've been arguing for decades now. And then, if you add that to the fact that, like DC statehood, Puerto Rico, all this stuff. And
Right.
it's like, and then they'll immediately change their logic. Like, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean? No, 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 not representative
Well,
democracy. What do you
that's
mean? No, they can't have statehood. What the fuck are you
they
talking about?
change
They
the
can pay
logic
taxes.
all the time.
Yeah,
It's
Puerto Ricans can pay taxes, but they can't have representation. No,
right.
absolutely not.
I mean, I was fucking just talking to you the other day about how I'm not a citizen. Newsflash, everyone, I'm not a citizen of the United States, but I pay taxes.
Yeah.
My daughter goes to Schenectady schools, but I can't vote on a green card. I can't vote in my local school board elections.
Yep.
What's up with that?
It's fucked up, man.
Is that a representation of the people that are adding to the community? No.
Right.
Don't get me
And
started on representation.
oh, no, I mean, go ahead, man. That's what we're doing here today. I mean, I definitely agree. And the thing is, too, like this isn't, it's just like anything else. A lot of these same problems that we talk about, we highlight on this one: representation, immigration, citizenship, these kinds of things. Like, we have dozens of historical examples of what that inevitably leads to when you don't handle those issues. When you don't, look at the Italians and Rome. That there's plenty, Palestine, Israel. There's plenty of instances where if you continue to just keep that in a box and act like it's not there, it's gonna bust out and bite you in the ass at some
It
point. And it doesn't mean it needs to be like in any violent way or anything, but with political instability.
Well, for fuck's sake, like, and this is not a fuck's sake at you, but we're seeing right now, capital insurrection. We're seeing denial of the fucking truth, the peaceful transfer of power. You're seeing voter laws and restrictions coming in all over the country as a fucking rebuke to what they thought went on. You're seeing attempted rollbacks of Roe v. Wade. All these things happening together. you can fucking put your hat on it and say that this is the biggest threat to what they think is democracy going on right now. And again, this is another instance where, if they're going to talk about the filibuster, the crazy thing is that like Democrats are also trying to get their own party on board with that. Where if this was a Republican issue trying to smash the filibuster, that they would be all stepping in line. Or you're trying to fucking get Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, and there's a couple other ones. I don't think Biden is realistic that he could ever do that, nor would he want to. But
no, and that's the thing, right? It's all in the framing of, how the media tries to make us perceive this. Like, I don't agree with that. Like, the Democratic Party is not trying to get anyone in line with that. They're not. That's just, in my opinion, and I think that there's so much evidence across the last decade or so of Democratic Party politics that this is just a red herring. This is just a little bit of slop they're trying to throw to the left to be like, oh, look, oh, we tried.
Yeah.
We have these problems. I don't believe that, because at the end of the day, like, you saw it. Bernie got asked, even Bernie, and I'll lay some blame at his feet too. He talked all that shit and said, oh, I'll go to West Virginia. You know what I mean? And Biden, he acts like he's that guy. You know what I mean? I remember watching him on the campaign trail, yelling at, fucking the one steel worker, talking about the Second Amendment, whatever. He gets aggressive in a bunch of other areas. It's not like it's not in his character,
right,
to push for things that he believes in or that he wants done. Mm-hmm. And now he's wearing the belt. He's the champ. He's the fucking president. I'm not seeing anything. And that can pivot us right into this next part where, Joe Biden just actually released his budget, folks. And lo and behold, there's a lot of shit missing. There is a whole ton of shit missing. Arguably, the largest thing he promised on the campaign, which would be a public option, gone, non-existent, not happening. I got some articles pulled up. I don't even think I really need to quote it. I think we've got it all down pat here. So no public option, not happening this year. Biggest campaign promise, I would argue, money-wise, he made, because he didn't even go that in-depth on infrastructure when he ran. This is kind of just like, it's sort of just been a hobby horse of the Democratic Party for a long time. You know what I mean? Like, sure, infrastructure time was, I think that came out of utility because there was a ton of things that he did want to do that were good, like, increased funding for pre-K and all these other things that aren't traditionally infrastructure. So I think it was useful for them to come out of the gate and make that their first big major policy push, other than coronavirus stimulus and stuff. But, it's really interesting that no public option, huge campaign promise, not on there. No forgiveness of student loans. That's a big one that I think a lot of people don't realize, like, how much the Democratic Party base is actually going to be resentful about that, because you turned out all these millennials. They're the ones saddled with the most debt. You sat there and talked all that shit and said, oh, $15,000. That was a campaign promise.
Right.
And then you got pushed from your left. People trying to say, Pramila Jayapal, even Chuck Schumer talking about, hey, you know what? $50K would probably be a better idea. They showed him all the numbers. It's totally possible with an executive powers. And now it's nothing. We're all just supposed to go home and just be like, hey, well, you know what? He did a good job, like, getting me a vaccine for free. I'm sorry, that's not enough for how big an election that they framed this to be.
Right.
It's just not. For the return on investment, for how much attention people paid to politics, how hard a lot of people campaigned for him, how much black folks in this country sold out for him and pushed him across that finish line.
Yeah.
Okay? And this is something that we talk about a lot, where, we can connect it to Clyburn. You know what I mean? Like, we brought him up earlier on the episode. He's the South Carolina kingmaker. What did he get out of? What did black folks actually get after all this? Oh, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black.
Jack.
All this. What happened? We still got a bunch of anti-police brutality legislation that was proposed, hasn't even been written. Biden's not pushing it. No federal database for, police misconduct. A ton of the things that a lot of NAACP leaders pressured Biden on when he first became president-elect, non-existent. So
Like,
I don't know. We have a whole slew of stuff, but yeah, go ahead. There's more.
well, I was going to say, it doesn't bode well for anything that he puts out if, you know, if they can't get through the most basic things and it's getting filibustered. You know, Representative Pokane and Lee, from Mark Pokane, Pentagon budget fails to reflect our nation's true needs. Did you see the Pentagon budget portion of it?
Yeah.
In quotes, he says, if budgets are moral documents, a 13 billion increase in defense spending is a failure that doesn't reflect this country's actual needs. In the last year, the biggest threat to our nation was a global pandemic, and we were drastically unprepared for it. Now we're proposing a defense spending increase that alone is 1.5 times larger than the Center for Disease Control Prevention's entire 8.7 million budget.
Right.
I'd agree with that. And then he goes on to say we need to redefine what defense and national security means in this country: job security, healthcare security, housing security, climate security. These are the national security crises we should be defending. The American people against, not more futile wars abroad or lucrative contracts for fucking private defense contractors.
For sure.
And I'd agree with all that.
And newsflash, Americans, like the threat, the call's coming from inside the house.
Exactly.
Like we've had multiple FBI reports, multiple Homeland Security reports, reaching back to Obama through Trump to now even being confirmed in the beginning of the Biden presidency that white supremacist organizations are the largest domestic threat to America. Yeah. So we're doing all this defense spending. That's all for exterior foreign policy issues. Has nothing to do with inside this country. So again, we're just talking about a complete disconnect from what the actual threat to Bob or Mary living in America, what their threat to their physical body is.
Well, I mean,
we're just completely disconnected.
This also speaks to, again, we're in a two-party system, right? And one of the fucking two parties is clearly anti-democratic. But, one thing that they always come together on, you don't get much pushback either way, is the fucking defense spending.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's the guaranteed bipartisanship every year. That and the National Prayer Breakfast.
Yeah.
It's those two things. Everyone will show up to. But here's a perfect pivot right off of that. We just went in. We were talking about the filibuster earlier. Biden's budget. We just laid out. We didn't lay it out, but just talking about what was fucking missing. So I have right here from Jake Sherman at Punchbowl News. I have a series of tweets here. I can't pull up the article, but he explains the next issue. The biggest issue that I foresee here, how we're just going to keep treading water until September. So he tweets, Senate Democrats are now unlikely to try using the fiscal year 2021 budget resolution to put together another reconciliation package, according to three sources close to the issue. This is important because it tells us a lot about the Senate's timing. Mm-hmm. If you remember, parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough ruled that Senate Democrats can use the same budget resolution to pass multiple majority vote reconciliation packages, according to Chuck Schumer. Democrats used the fiscal year 2021 budget and resolution to pass the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan in March, and they could use it again. But senior Democrats privately don't believe they can finish work on a second reconciliation package by the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. So this is exactly what we called and talked about on, I can't remember what episode number, but the urgency with all this, folks, because even if, which I didn't even think that the parliamentarian was going to okay what Chuck Schumer was theorizing, but she did. But even if that had been the case, it's like you had to be writing that infrastructure bill already when you were talking about that in the media. It's a giant bill.
Yeah.
This shit takes time. There's so much deliberation that needs to happen just in the House, let alone for you to kick it up to the Senate for you to change filibuster rules around or just push it through reconciliation. But either way, each one of those processes takes at least 3 months. Right. So right now it's June. So all we're talking about here is maybe the House getting an infrastructure bill put across the goal line by, I don't know, late September. Mm-hmm. So, and the real issue that this is here, he continues on, is this also means that the debate over infrastructure could drag well into the fall which will put it on a collision path with government funding and debt limit skirmishes. So you're kicking out the key piece of legislation that you needed to pass legislatively, not emergency stuff, not COVID. Key actual change, fundamental change. You're kicking that out to a time and place during when, everybody who pays attention to politics knows, once we start talking about, we got to talk about government funding. And we had a government shutdown like every year for the last 5 years, briefly, because they can't agree on funding. You're kicking this out to a time when Republicans have an inherent advantage because they can just drag you across the coals and just put up huge numbers on Fox and be like, $8 trillion,
Mm-hmm.
10 billion trillion dollars.
Yep, without actually caring. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, it doesn't need to make sense. It's just fear mongering over fiscal issues. So you're purposefully, this is what I mean, though. This is why I feel so much like, damn, I came out of the gate and tried to give Biden so much credit. And, Schumer seems to be having some like late stage political evolution. Like, cool. But it's like, is it really though? Because they seem to be taking every wrong turn possible still. It's almost like controlled opposition at this point, where it's like, you're just not doing the thing you should have obviously done on purpose.
Yeah.
It's like, so what are you going to do until September? Tell me, what is the legislative agenda? What is it? Okay, we had HR 1. That's dead in the Senate. You won't touch the filibuster.
He's talking about bringing it up to August, right? On the HR 1.
Yeah. But my point is, if you're going to change the filibuster, it's not happening. Right. So again, we're talking about these structural things. Guys, this was a month and a half ago. I was freaking out and screaming on the pod about this. Almost 2 months ago. Here I am again. It's almost June 1st.
He's screaming again.
And now they're talking about September 30th.
Yeah.
What the fuck is going on? What are you wasting a supermajority for? Why? At least Obama came out of the gate and tried to do shit and got shit on by McConnell.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even trying here.
Right.
They're not even bringing it up in the Senate. What is happening right now? I'm trying not to be this cynical, but it's like, you're literally being the Washington Wizards. Like, it seems like you're just losing on purpose right now.
Slow as molasses. It's just a slow moving car crash.
Yeah, I don't know, dog. It feels like more than if it is a car crash, it certainly doesn't feel like an accidental one.
Yeah, I mean, how long was it? Was it $6 trillion was the budget proposal?
I think it was 8 actually, because that's including the Pentagon stuff.
The plan reflects Biden's ambitious plans to invest trillions in infrastructure and support for American families.
Yeah.
Corporate tax increase would raise $2 trillion over a decade. Tax increases on high earners, those making above $400,000 per year, and would raise $750 billion over the decade. Raising the top marginal income tax rate to 39.6 to 37, and near doubling of capital gains tax rates for people earning more than $1 million a year.
Yeah.
But again, what's going to be? Can they use reconciliation on this?
On what? On the infrastructure bill?
On this.
Yeah, that's what the plan is. That's what they're saying. Jake Sherman's reporting here is that they plan on doing it for fiscal year 2022.
So, but this is that means they're going to start. The other one they can get across, right? Or they have.
Well, there will be no more use of reconciliation this year. That's basically what they're saying. Not before September 30th.
But it would. But it would be for 2022.
Right, it would be for 2022, and it's probably, if anything did pass this large through reconciliation, it's gonna happen probably in 2022 and that's why he brought up that important piece of context. I like the way that he laid this tweet thread out, because whenever something gets punted to the next fiscal year, it means it's not happening till that year, that actual calendar year, because we are going to have a drawn out fight over government funding. That's going to suck up the news cycle. Right. No one's going to be writing legislation for some giant infrastructure package to rush through in Q4. That's not going to happen. It's never happened. It's certainly not going to start now. We don't have any movement on the filibuster. And on top of that, I can tell you right now, I'm going to make a prediction right now on the show. I can guarantee you the way that this is going to happen is he laid it out perfectly. This is going to run right into the time when government funding is the biggest issue in the media. Mm-hmm. The media is going to play it up and talk about it. The Republicans already have a giant club to wield with. We are in some inflation. That's going to hold some purchase amongst Americans who are paying. We're probably going to hit like $3.40 fucking gas prices at some point this summer.
Right.
So that's going to have real purchase. That's going to have real world feel to people who hear Republicans bitching about this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Republicans are going to be using that in the context of, look how much Joe Biden's trying to spend. Watch how much more inflation there's going to be next year. We can't let this happen. That's going to roll into the midterms and they're going to fuck themselves, which is exactly why you should have burst this through, this infrastructure in, at least by now. Like, by now, you should have been putting it forward. They're fucking themselves.
What are they waiting?
Like, what? I don't know, man. What did they do? They didn't do anything. What major legislation has happened or even been talking? You know what I read the other day? I read an article about Amy Klobuchar put forward legislation in the Senate so that campaign contribution websites can't have pre-checked boxes for continuing contributions. That's what they're spending their fucking time on in the Senate. You know how long it takes to write a bill? Even something that short? It takes time. What the fuck are they doing? What are they doing? I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any chatter. All I see is Corona talk and foreign policy, which I'm glad that foreign policy is actually getting a fair shake right now. And it's, you know, American media typically doesn't pay that much attention to it, but it's coming at the expense of everyone getting put to sleep on domestic policy where nothing's happened in 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I don't know. I'm feeling extremely pessimistic right now. Very worried. Well, because the thing is, where's the lion, man?
Yeah.
Where is it? You know, Bernie can only do so much heavy lifting. Even AOC's kind of faded into the background, where she's kind of just like giving little critiques here and there.
But that's what I'm talking about now. Is like a truly a time now where people are getting almost like switched off because
It's getting nice out.
well,
Everybody just did a year of politics. No one cares anymore.
yeah, but also like the government itself right now is just they know that one party is going to block the other and it's just going to be this game and it's like okay,
Hey, I gotta hit the head real
All
quick.
right.
Carry.
I'll continue to hold down the fort. But yeah, it's crazy. So the proposal is the biggest budget in recent history. It's reflecting the massive government spending plans Biden rolled out this spring in his push to bolster the middle class and make the United States more competitive with China. His 1.5 trillion budget, which would increase funding for education, the IRS, and the Centers for Disease Control, among other things. 2.3 trillion for the American Jobs Plan. That's kind of invested in infrastructure, and that's in negotiation with Congress. Good luck on that. 1.8 trillion for the American Families Plan, and that'll on universal pre-K and 2 years of free college, community college. But I'm with Ramon on this. It's slow moving, knowing that you know how hard it's been to get bipartisanship on anything. It's not looking good, let me tell you. And it just seems to be the same old story, same old song and dance. So what can they get done? I don't know. It's one of those things where I feel like we're going back around in circles with this. But, you know, using reconciliation for just budget stuff is one of the prerequisites. You know, there's ways of trying to finagle that, but I don't think that this discussion can go on for much longer about should we nix the filibuster or should we not. They just need to grow a pair. And then these discussions will really be more weighty. When you have 53 senators, you know, a majority vote in favor of something. Only in America would shit like that not be actually, you know, passed into law. And Ramon, I was just saying we're going to continue having these conversations. Again, you know, this infrastructure bill and any bill that's brought forward, knowing that the way the filibuster is, using reconciliation, if the filibuster was gone, then there would be truly a discussion on all these things, as opposed to the way that it's set up right now. America seems to be the only place in the world where you have a consensus wants something and it's still not getting done. What does that reflect?
Right. I think what it reflects, in a bunch of different facets. Like it's all a matter of there's this invisible barrier between a lot of things that the majority of Americans want, or what people understand as the right thing, right? So like on foreign policy, like there's been this invisible barrier around Israel and Palestine, right? Like we know what that is. It's money and influence, and the specter, the false pretense of anti-Semitism being laying over, being put as a veil over the truth,
Yeah.
and weaponized. And the same thing happens in our domestic policy, where it's like, oh, this is why we can't, whatever. There's always some reason. And I think the difference here is what you're saying, like with America being so unique in that, where it's like there's so many different aspects of public policy where there's a just crying out for change. There's a ton of support for these things. And, you know, it's just, it's like we've talked about a ton on this podcast. Like, I don't think that there's no real threat to any of these people. You have the
No.
campaign finance system where they're able to keep playing within these parameters of, oh, just whatever money, wherever money goes, I go, and I'll talk to people and just keep it on moving.
Hmm.
And then if you couple that with the fact that, a ton of Americans just don't want to be that invested in, the political process, and or especially activism. You know what I mean? Like we saw flashes of it with George Floyd, and even that's been bottled up. Even that got co-opted and thrown out. That's done. If you look at the public policy polling on Democrats now, it's down double digits for support for Black Lives Matter. Do you know why that is? The reason that is because even when the contradictions were completely heightened last summer, when we all saw the vicious brutality of what happened, we actually had real coverage and content about the historical dynamic of policing in this country, the injustices. Even while the reaction to all of that history was happening on live TV in front of us, what did we get? We got complacent language like, oh, well, yeah, those things were bad, but this is bad
Yeah.
too. Or, oh, oh, this and that.
What aboutism?
Neoliberalism is constantly trying to tamp down, trying to push below the surface, or just so the mouth is above water, so that activists and radicals can still breathe. But you can't let that body above. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And that's why it's all an ebb and flow of the way that co-optation has continually taken place amongst the left in this country. You let it burst out, you give it a little bit of time. It breathes. It has its raw form, its organic presence out in the media, in the discourse, all of this, right?
Hmm.
And then what happens? You bring on a couple of the leaders of that movement. You bring them on board. You start, supporting some of their projects. Look what the NFL did after Kaepernick. Perfect example. Look
Hmm.
what Biden's doing with George Floyd's family. It gives the perception of, I hear you, I see you, but I'm not going to fundamentally change anything. And why is that? Because it would threaten my political power base. Then I would have to challenge police unions. Then I would have to challenge billionaire owners in the NFL. There's, at the end of the day, if we don't see any shift or movement where these people actually feel threatened enough to do any of the things that they promise and just lie to you about and don't do,
Well, that's the thing
it's
is,
never going to change.
yeah,
It's
it's
just,
all
it's
quite
never going to
depressing
change.
actually, because what is going to be that thing that makes the shift? If something like what we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, and then on top of this year that just happened, if that is not going to be the point where we have a paradigm shift in all of this, then I don't know what is.
Well,
And I would push
I'll
back
tell
and
you,
say that, like, I definitely think that the last 4 or 5 years has reinvigorated the movements, and I guess political people getting involved politically and understanding local elections and politics should start at home and stuff like that. But I just feel like everything is so slow moving. It's like way too slow, and it doesn't need to be that way. And for a lot of the time, it's Democrats getting in their own way. When you have the consensus, or at least legal democratic consensus, it seems like, or would be in like 90% of the world, 99% of the world, in the so-called strongest and greatest democracy in the world, we've said it before, they can't get it done, and it's kind of depressing. But
Well, I mean, I don't find it like, sure, I am a pessimistic realist, but I don't get depressed. It makes me more invigorated and feeling validated in what
your opposition to it, yeah,
my opposition to it, but also my conviction in the fact that they're doing this shit on purpose, because you can't lose this much. Like, just the logic, the mathematical like concept of chance would break through at some point. It's been too long. We have to go back to like LBJ for left victories.
right.
Why is that? Why is that? You know what I
They
mean?
don't play the game well enough.
Well, sure, but and I think a lot of it is it's the selection of it all. And this goes back to like what I was saying before, like with that concept of co-optation. I listened to Cornel West, who I think is a prophet, who is
I love him.
a magical philosophical thinker. And he breaks it down very simply. Whenever you have left groundswell amongst things, and that again, that concept of co-optation, I think the big reason why we're seeing such slow movement, where it's like, there's so much depressing of how fast, like the volatility of the George Floyd situation. I know I keep referring to that because that is the most, it was the largest protest in American history. You know what I mean? Like, it was explosive. It has a lot of valence to what we're discussing right now. Like, it connects so heavily to that.
Right.
But what Cornel West talks about is, he says, because there's the gatekeepers of power are so insular now, and there's so few of them, that whenever they reach a hand out to give the perception of lifting up a person who is a radical, who is at the head of whatever the new groundswell is amongst the left, those people will readily grab that hand because they think, oh, well, yeah, sure, I'm getting a platform now. We have to reverse the whole thinking on that. Once you're in that system, once you're within the system, and they lift you up and give you resources, we'll talk about a plan, you're nullified at that point.
Right.
You're no longer on the outside. You're no longer agitating and putting pressure on the administrations, on the establishments. And that's the difference of what we see through the first half of the 20th century. Oh, I would argue all the way up to the 60s. And then that break off starts happening where the progress starts, it's on a much smaller slope. It's no longer huge spikes and dips, where in the first half of the 20th century you saw extreme explosions of progress followed by extreme regressions and extreme, now it's just like, and it feels dissatisfying. And the reason for that is I think Cornel West nails it. It's that co-optation, because money has so much influence now, so much more than it used to, that it's too easy to co-opt things and people and movements. And that is what slows that drive of progress. Look at perfect example. I saw on Twitter the other day, Mark Ruffalo, who's a pretty outspoken left.
Yeah,
you saw that? Yeah. He's been talking about Israel-Palestine for years. Now, even Bernie Sanders went on TV. He was asked about, do we need to, how are you feeling about the rhetoric right now in Israel-Palestine? And what did even Bernie said it? I think we need to tone it back, because you had all these articles, the media industrial complex, whatever you want to call it. They started writing all these articles, and a bunch of Jewish Americans were like, I feel threatened by how upset people are at Israel right now, which doesn't even make any sense. Now, if you couple this with the fact that there's been explosions in anti-Semitism in America for the last 4 years, Donald fucking Trump, and all of these right-wing
Jews
movements.
will not replace us at Charleston.
Yeah. And it's crazy how now we're having that cognitive dissonance where that no longer happened. The only reason that Jews feel threatened in America or anti-Semitism is on the rise is because the left is talking about Israel and Palestine. Right. That is incorrect. That's a false premise.
Yep.
That's not true.
Disingenuous.
So, but what does it do? What is the effect? Even Bernie, I think we need to tone it down. It's getting a little too crazy. Mark Ruffalo, I want to apologize for calling Palestinians being moved from uh,
Apartheid.
Sheikh Jarrah, genocide,
Yeah.
and what's been happening.
Yeah.
He peeled back a word that he's been using for years because he read what we're in now. We're in this sympathy economy where it's like who's the most oppressed. And I don't mean to say this to like pick up on. I'm not taking this in the context of like insane right wing talking points where they're like, oh, it's the oppression Olympics. Like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm talking about on a discourse level, on a real human level.
Mm-hmm.
What we see happening is, and this is another reason why the progress stalls. We see the clear evidence of civilians being killed at a disproportionate rate in Israel and Palestine, the Israel-Palestine war, whatever you want to call it. And then what happens? Israeli propaganda and American Zionist propaganda immediately pushes back with, no, 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 we're much more oppressed. Look at what's happening here. And
Right.
that is true. Like there are issues of anti-Semitism in America and globally.
Right.
No one's discounting that.
Right.
But that has nothing to do with us criticizing a nation state.
Right.
It doesn't have anything to do with those two things.
Yeah, it's not.
But again, it's what we're combining these concepts of co-optation and the sympathy economy.
But that
and that's why everything's so slow.
But that is
that
the
really
only
is all
rebuke
it is.
that they have. Anybody who is still pro what Israel is doing, the only rebuke they have is that they're being anti-Semitic for even questioning him.
But the thing is, as long as we live in this universe we've created around our cultural politics, that holds weight.
Yeah, it does.
And it's something me and you have discussed a lot before, where we talk about, how much, as a leftist, how much weight do you give? What's the ratio between the racial justice and the economic justice? What's the balance? Like, what's the correct mixture to find the recipe that's going to win? Whatever you want to call that.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Unfortunately, we know that money talks. And it's so ingrained in everything that we think of and are contentious about that has it gotten in so much now that the actual discourse is not able to be had without the more influential fucking point getting taken and blown up. Something like Israel and Palestine and specifically the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and Palestine and the blockade for the last 17 years is that anytime anybody was critical of the state of Israel, they would be labeled anti-Semitic. And like I said in the episode that we did, this is the first time in a while that we've heard the mainstream media, somewhat collectively damning Israel for what they were doing and talking about how it was disproportionate and how there was indiscriminate killings. But like I said, I think the only pushback that these people could get is and I'm not saying that the anti-Semitic attacks that were happening in America were not important, but I think that should not take away from what is actually still happening. I think everything is heightened. The rhetoric is hot. People are passionate about what's going on in Palestine. And there is I saw some terrible signs of Palestinian protesters. I made sure to say to the people who follow me that, you can be critical of Israel without being anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And that's just plain fact. Israel and the Jewish people, it's one of the only places where they're inherently tied, their religion and, a place. And that's why there was a dynamic with what was happening in the north of Ireland with this, because it was kind of like Catholics versus Protestants. So what I've seen, though, this time around and this specific uptick is that you have a lot of Jewish Americans and prominent Jewish people, and even like Israeli Human Rights Watch have called out what is going on. So it's becoming more and more difficult to justify what's happening. But in saying that, you have America again, and I feel like we've talked about this 3 weeks in a row, but I think it's good to highlight it each time.
Absolutely.
America, each time at the UN Security Council and whatever council vote, they always vote against what is actually being put to kind of reprimand or at least recognize what the fuck is going on there. Ireland is the first country to recognize. I reposted it on my page there, but they've put through legislation now where they're actually recognizing what Israel is doing in Palestine and calling it for what it is, which
I saw that,
you know,
which is incredible because there are countries in the UN that are, potential enemies of Israel that haven't done so.
right.
Like that actually have legitimate reason to denounce them on the world stage. And that just speaks to, again, the level of, just like we have, like, this insane level of income inequality domestically. Like there's this insane level of disproportionate power on a global stage. Like, we talked about it on previous episodes. Like, you know, international bodies just don't carry the weight they used to anymore. To the point where it's like, yeah, that's awesome that Ireland did that, and it's phenomenal that they're the first, and it's the truth, and it's good to hear countries make statements that speak the truth and not worry about the repercussions. But it really does say something that you have something this bald-faced and obvious that it takes that long. It takes that long. And this is what I worry about, right? Because earlier you mentioned where you said, you were like, oh, everything's moving so slow. Like, what is it going to take? And, it was super misguided. What is it going to take in America? I mean, like it was super misguided and it was completely based in falsehood. But like January 6th is the kind of thing that it probably will take. And I don't mean like invading the Capitol, but I mean radicalism. People being disobedient.
Right.
That is probably that's the only thing that's gonna move the needle.
Well, you look through history, and those have been the only things. Yeah.
Well, yeah, especially when you're talking about a country as powerful and rich as America. It's the only thing. When you put that egg on the face of these people that run this country, where it's like other countries get to look and be like, oh, look, the stupid Americans can't control their people.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. That is the only thing. General strikes in the 30s. Civil disobedience in the 60s, draft dodging around Nam. Those are the kinds of things. Those are the only kinds of things. Because at the end of the day, no matter what boycott movement you do, no matter what, money no longer is. It's a completely surmountable issue for any nation state at the level of which America is at.
Right.
They do not care. It doesn't matter how much money you withhold, whatever. None of that even does anything anymore. And you know what? And there's a lot of people like Killer Mike, for example, who I have a lot of respect for, where, they do like, oh, let's just put money in local banks and black banks, whatever. Like, that's just, to me, that's no different than like, oh, let's solve climate change by like picking up garbage. And sure, it feels good and it's great for your locale, but it will not shift or move the federal government. It's like as much as we're giving credence to like the media outpouring of decrying of Israel's crimes recently, like again, like we said on the last week's episode, like Biden still signed the weapons deal.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what we're talking about here, folks, is institutions and centers of power just looking at you in the face and being like, I'm going to keep doing it. What are you going to do about it? They're asking you. They're saying to you, if you actually care about this stuff, and I'm not saying this to like inflame people or whatever. It's just that's the reality. It is the reality.
And I
they're
think
they're looking at you and saying, what are you going to do about it?
Well,
because the mask is off at this point. We're seeing something very close to the truth from the talking heads, which is something you typically didn't get in the past. Now they're actually touching on it because it's so prevalent and obvious that they can't contain it anymore without seeming like charlatans themselves. But at the end of the day, if those institutions of power just keep on doing it and they're like, yeah, what are you going to do?
Well, I think for the most recent and I guess most famous instance of apartheid kind of getting overturned in South Africa, it was the boycotts, it was the ostracization from the international community towards South Africa that I think helped bring along that monumental change.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
You have,
but the thing
Mandela
is, no
in
one in the
prison gets
world
out, and then all of a sudden,
the thing is though, like South Africa in its in its function, or I shouldn't say in its function, like on a principle level, like yes, it's not a complete 1-to-1, but it's the closest thing we've seen to this situation with Israel and Palestine. So you would hope that similar strategies would work, but the only difference there is like no one globally from a hegemonic level, whether it be like China or the USSR at the time or America, no one cared about what happened in South
Yeah,
America.
you're true.
No
That's
one gave a
true,
shit.
but
You know what I
it
mean? Like,
forced the
no one
hand a
cared.
little bit
It
of
was just colonized. It was just
right.
like a semi-colonized place, and people were like,
And
whatever. You know,
I thought it was interesting though as well, and I saw Twitter can be a weird place. I saw a guy listen to one podcast. He's like, I had to get off Twitter because people are just arguing on there all the time. It's just an argue fest, which it's not entirely true, but it does seem like that quite a bit. But he
right.
was talking about. He brought up the instance of, like, let's say Israel, right? They brought on the Pakistani, some delegate from Pakistan who was talking about the Israel and Palestine conflict, and he said that he was pressed on the question. I think it was a CNN host, some obscure one, not one that I really know. She pressed him on what he said, that Israel has quite a bit of influence, and she pressed on him, and then she was saying that's a anti-Semitic trope to say Israel has a lot of influence and deep pockets, is what he said. And actually, Mehdi Hassan, who I admire, I think he does some great work. He actually labeled it similar too, in that the Pakistani foreign minister should have chose his words a little bit more carefully, because that is a trope that is used, to denigrate Jewish people.
For sure.
But I would fucking argue that they do have mass amounts of influence, clearly, and they have deep pockets because of the PAC in America here, and you're clearly seeing they have influence in that America and other global powers continuously vote against reprimanding them for doing what they do. I don't think the Pakistani foreign minister was intending to go at Jewish people. He was talking about the state of Israel. But like you said, it gets co-opted around how can we fight back against someone fucking telling the truth. We can label it as this and try completely dismiss the substance of what you're saying. And that's we're going to drive each other crazy if we continue to do that without actually taking.
Well, and that's the point.
Right.
That's the point of the strategy.
It's merry-go-round.
It's extremely effective. It's because first off, it's the only play they have, because there is no logical argument against what people are saying. That's just the simple statement of, hey, can you stop killing civilians? There is no other play for them to have other than to induce madness amongst the discourse.
Yep.
That's the whole point. That it's a psyop. That's the whole point. And it's like, I love that you just said that the way that like Mehdi broke that down, because like in what you were saying, because it for me in my heart, like it's very close to things that I tried to talk about with black radicalist language too.
Right.
Where it can edge on that point where you have like, folks who are, like we talk about all the time, like the Hotep language, like black supremacy and stuff like that. And it's like, so even that can be, now that doesn't get institutionally quashed.
Right.
Like people who call out black supremacists in America, people who explicitly use language that talk about,
Mr. Farrakhan or stuff like that.
Yeah, Luis Farrakhan, black extremists, which exist, and that's not a, you can't call it a trope because black people have never been in control of anything.
Right.
So that's, that's why that doesn't really have that backing. But you do get it you get discourse pushback. You don't get establishment pushback the way that you do from Israel, but it still has a very close relationship where it's something that if like it's deemed like, oh, if I go too far, am I being racist?
Right.
Like, no, we can't. This is the drawback of what I don't want to. I hate the word cancel culture. I refuse to use it. But if we keep we keep living in this space where rather than if someone has a bad idea, debate them and explain, beat them in the argument. You know what I mean? Like, instead of leaning on these, like, oh, well, this signals this thing to me that this other bad person I know has an opinion of, and therefore you must be just like that bad person, and I'm not going to engage with it and just call it anti-Semitic or racist. In regards to like the argument about black folks. And this is exactly why, like to bring him in again, like Cornel West. That's why I love the way that he talks about these issues, because he spent a lot of time in the last, decade or so. He took a lot of heat for going after Obama
Mm-hmm.
and people like Ta-Nehisi Coates and people that he calls, he literally said, he literally called, like, basically called Obama like the N-word at one point in like 2015, where he said the N-erization of the American presidency, where he was saying like, you're just carrying water for Wall Street at this point. And he was saying that in critique to like what Ta-Nehisi Coates was saying, where he was, lifting Obama up as this, this herald of the
Deity,
new
yeah,
time
yeah,
to come in and all this. And I understand and appreciate the symbolism of all that. But when we get down to the functional level of like what we're talking about today, what we started off talking about, like what has actually
yeah.
happened
Well,
aside from symbolism and people feeling good about like, oh, this seems so much better than where we used to
right.
be. It's very similar, these things that we're all kind of like hovering around, and there's this thing that we can't touch and we don't know, like we feel the pressure from it, but we don't know where it's coming from. And I think it's just like it's this interesting time in, 21st century information era, where it's like we still haven't quite figured out how we're gonna be able to pierce these issues around, discourse in this uh sympathy economy we've created. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's completely a pendulum swing in the opposite direction of what this country used to be. This country used to be about like rapacious capitalism was celebrated, like domination, you know what I mean? Imperialism. Like that was even if the regular American didn't know what America was doing overseas in foreign policy, it's still reflected in the culture. Like people still, it came from the top down. You didn't have guys like Joe Biden going on TV and almost crying, talking about food getting put in the back of trunks. You didn't have guys on like Joe Biden talking about how bad he felt for families of people who'd been killed. Presidents didn't do shit like that back in the day. They didn't do stuff like that. They came out strong. There's a culture shift happening, and I think that we're in the middle of like just this crazy process of trying to assimilate like how to understand or work within the change before we break to some new place. And I don't know how else to explain it. I really don't, because it's like you're saying, we're in this like just the in between. Like we're nothing moves or happens, but we're being told it is feeling like it's progress, and this is why you should feel like it, because there's new faces and higher places.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if the guy that I live down the street from is only making $2 more than he made 10 years ago doing the same job, what really has changed?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I keep wanting to bring it back to these things, because like it's great to talk about foreign policy and racial progress and all these other things, but it's like we're just going to enter that same cycle again at some point,
Yeah.
if nothing else fundamentally changes.
Yeah.
And that's why I get so frustrated by it. And I know I'm rambling here, but we have to do like, or maybe I'll do a live stream, or we can do an episode where we really dive into like trying to understand and focus on like or just talk about like where we're at, where I feel like, and I'll be honest, I feel like the pendulum has swung too far on the left around just racial and
Grievances.
social
Oh.
justice and grievances and sympathy culture, where we get so focused on that like once like we're done complaining to the manager and that person like gets in trouble or fired, or
Yeah.
we feel like we won, that's it, everybody just goes home.
I-
And it's like you're not winning
And
anything.
I'm of the thought that it's one of those things that seems a lot louder because of social media, but I think if you're to meet and talk to people generally, black and white, who and you give them a set of circumstances, or lay out a story of the actual stories that they're fighting against, I think it would be a lot more consensus than you would think. And that is very broad statement from me, but I think online everything seems heightened and so much more divisive. But who am I to say that? But
Right.
I do think that cancel culture, I'll say it, and this, getting on somebody for making a mistake, or and this is left and right. It happens where there's like a pitchfork out and like, let's get him. There's no room to grow and develop in that space because it's so vitriol. Um, I'll say the social justice movement. I think I wouldn't say it has gone too far to the left. I don't know if I'm mischaracterizing what you said, but
Well, no, I'm saying the ratio between like the left pairing social justice and economic justice has grown out of whack.
right, it should be more
Like,
balanced within the conversation.
yeah, there needs to be
Yeah.
a healthier balance
Right.
for sure.
And the understanding of someone who is fighting for social justice, you can only truly have that if you have economic justice, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about, because the economics of living in poverty drives you towards the things that would, make you be socially ostracized even more and more, you know?
Mhm.
So I definitely agree with that. But again, we live in an age now where a lot of what we see is entertainment, whether it's dressed up that way. So
Right.
even on Twitter, like I said, everyone is just trying to dunk on everyone else, get the right point across, become famous, get retweets, likes. So the more outrageous they can be, the more that they can video themselves, yelling at a person for not wearing a mask or whatever it is. That's going to get more clout. It's the reality of it. But even within politics, politicians and talking heads are doing the same thing on a similar type of level. Then you need to be outraged by this, that, or the other. And I spoke to you before about this. The news now has turned into, everything is a breaking news story that should be paired with something else. Then a couple of days later to rehash it and talk about it again, and it's just a never-ending cycle of grievances, and the actual substance of what we're talking about is lost in all this like shock and awe, when
Right.
the thinking people are kind of left to be like, why are we still fucking talking about these same things without actual stuff getting done?
Right.
Um,
And I think just to cap off like the thought I was having and to add on to what you were saying is like, and I agree with you. Like you were saying, like, oh, I feel like if you go talk to people, like people generally, agree on a lot of this stuff, and that is true, right? On just like a level, like a human connection
right.
level. But the problem is that connection doesn't happen on an electoral
No.
level. And perfect example is we just had a Democratic primary where we were in the height of all of this,
Mm-hmm.
all of the what we're talking about, the sympathy economy, all these whatever, and we elected the most right wing guy.
Right.
So what does that say?
Well, and,
What that says to me is people will say things, but there's some other input that can override it very easily.
right. And
Jim
I think,
Clyburn, like
yeah.
institutional power still is not threatened enough to just other than to just say things, and that trickles down, it permeates down to the electorate.
Well, I think also,
Like,
though, can I just say that is part of the tribalism of a two-party system as well, is that, like, at the end of the day, you get in the ballot box and you may believe and get on with your neighbor and want to be live and let live, but your own interests supersede that in a sense now, because it's gotten so partisan that
sure.
you can no longer vote for the interests of your neighbor. It's completely about you and your party winning, just so you can be like, oh, we got no Dems in here. This is in our country, or we got, only liberals live here. It's a liberal enclave.
Right.
So
But I mean, and the thing is, it trickles down to even to move to the movement level too. Like now that like as much as Black Lives Matter, like as a countrywide organization, I think that it's a joke. Black Lives Matter chapters are the real thing. But as far as like the federal organization of it, that's completely that is the co-optation we're talking about right now. The people sucking up all that money at the top that actually have very little of nothing to do with any of the actual movements that happened last summer, or Ferguson for that matter, or anything like that.
right.
Just people who parade jumped and hopped in the front of it. It's like what I said before. Like now that public policy polling is fading away, the people who are real about these movements, the people who are real about Israel Palestine, the people who are real about Black Lives Matter, the people who are real about a $15 minimum wage and not wanting their neighbors to be, even if you're not one of those people, not wanting people to suffer, we have to be real about the fact that the Democratic Party will tossed all these things away as soon as they stopped being useful.
Right.
As soon as it was no longer an imperative for them to support because public policy waned a little bit on it, or they stopped being pressured. We need to be realistic about that and use that understanding to 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 to, to use that in our understanding and the continuation of these movement formations, that you need to just continue to stay on the outside.
Right.
I know I keep going back to that, but like that's what Jesse Jackson understood. That is what Bernie Sanders understood.
Right.
He's been on the outside his whole career, and now he's in. And look, he's muted now because he got his small concessions. And again, this isn't a dunk on him.
Right.
This is just a reality of him. His political life cycle's coming to a close.
But
He's doing the correct move right now. Staying on the outside right now would not serve him more than being on the in. But there are other people and other movements that you must stay on the outside.
But in Bernie, in Bernie is a perfect example of where I can have optimism, though. Because if you think of that presidential run, the first one where he was paired against Hillary, and even though it was infuriating how he was kind of, ushered out of that, and then again, obviously in this run, with Bernie Sanders' policy and just his messaging, it brought along so many more progressives into the system, both in government now. You have a very strong progressive wing of the party. Strong, I would say, as it's been in a long, long time, and a vocal one, even though, you said they've been a little bit more muted as of late. But, Bernie Sanders is in a decent position now as kind of chair of the finance committee. Mm-hmm. But that's a good optimistic point to look at, is that, like,
for sure
he was an outsider for so long, and then a kind of out of the blue.
But look how long it took to get there. That's unsustainable. That's my point.
Right, but at least
if you can get a few exceptional people through in that regard, like look at Keith Ellison, shafted. Like he should have been DNC chair. Just saw a story the other day. Progressives wanted him. Tom Perez is working for a fucking consulting firm now. Gone.
That's the new.
Gone.
That's the way to do it. Is just go straight into a consulting role right after.
Yeah, and sure, Bernie squeaked through, but I'm just saying, as far as these larger movements are concerned, and people that are looking to get engaged in politics, just have that in the back of your mind. Understand that, because again, it's just a natural pull of the universe and how politics works. Yep. This isn't just my opinion. This is like proven fact. If you start moving into the interior of these political systems that you came into politics in your outset to criticize and change and move, you will, by definition, mute yourself to fit into that institution.
Yeah.
So it serves more function. This is why I appreciated like Jamaica Miles's run. This is why I appreciate people like her. I forget there's an Albany city councilman. I'm forgetting his name. I spoke to him at the Albany nurses rally for May Day. There's a lot of people who they have this understanding where it's like, hey, I accept it. I accept that I'm going to continually be ostracized from the main Democratic Party body. I still exist in it somewhat, but I am not going to be, taking the phone call from one of my, colleagues like, oh, can you tone it down on this or whatever? Because that's the start of the drop off. That's right. Where it begins at. And if that constant pressure isn't kept up, this is how we end up on these just constant little holding patterns.
The last thing I'll say on it, because I'm going to be wrapping it up here soon as we get into the weekend. I think, one instance there, I showed you how much of a change agent Bernie was for the Democratic Party, even though he didn't win the nomination. You're looking as well as how much of a change agent Donald Trump was for American American policy and American values and Republican policy and Republican values. So it doesn't take, it just takes someone with, and say what you want about Trump, he does have charisma. He got people watching, he got people involved, both for good and bad reasons. But again, that's another point of optimism in that, the things that we're talking about, the things that frustrate us, all it takes is, for enough people to be behind a message, and you get in the right situations, you're loud enough with that bully pulpit, and you can create real change. But again,
whether for better or worse.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying it for either way, but that's why the people who are in a position to bring people along, educate people, put support behind the right people really matters. And it'll be interesting. We're going to have a couple of people who are running for local and county races. We already had one person on. You've obviously spoke with Jamaica Miles prior to her run for our successful run for city council. It'll be interesting to see how, what change, these people talk about when they're running and being able to actually implement what they get. What I like to see, though, is, Jamaica clearly wants to continue to keep the dialogue going about the issues that she ran on, and having, people involved in the dialogue throughout the process and for as much as they can. But yeah, I think it can get quite frustrating. I always get back to it at the end of an episode after we've hashed it out, different things that are going on. But I think as long as the people who are in power continue to just stiff arm the will of the people, I think that anger and the desire is going to grow and not wane from the electorate. But who am I? I'm just a green card holder. I don't have a vote.
You're an Irishman, though, dog. You know what it takes.
I do.
Well, and to quote FDR, "Make me do it."
Yep.
That would make me do it.
Yep.
It's real simple.
Now, most important question: did you watch the Friends reunion?
Hell no, I've never even seen an episode of Friends.
You haven't?
I won't. No, I won't. I refuse to.
Wow.
Bro, I'm rewatching The Wire right now. I watch real television,
The
bro.
Wire.
Yeah.
I've never watched The Wire. That's one I've wanted to watch.
What? All right, well, stop watching Friends.
I
again.
haven't watched this new Friends thing. I refuse to.
You've never seen? Oh,
no, I have watched Friends. Friends
I've never.
is great.
I don't even know if
Friends.
it's bad. All right, I was gonna say I don't even know if it's bad.
I'm not even gonna front and say I've never watched Friends. I probably could quote a couple episodes. I think it was kind of ingrained in us a little bit, but they rolled out all the former cast for like a chit chat, and it's like the talk of everybody's day.
Yeah. Is it on like Netflix?
It's on
or
HBO
on
Max. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say some premium cable probably snatched
But
that up.
everyone's
Right?
just talking about the appearance of the former cast members. They're like, "Oh my God, Ross looks like he's made out of clay or something." That was my American accent, by the way.
Oh,
But
man.
yeah.
Well, all right. So hey, I was gonna say, do you want to tease next week? You kind of almost did there.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a special guest on next week. We still have to hash out the format, whether it's going to be in person or me and Ramon are going to be in person. But we're going to have Omar McGill on. He's running for county legislator here in Schenectady County to talk about his race. First of all, he's going to be running against the Democratic candidate, Savage. So we're going to talk about that, talk about his policies, and just talk about, kind of what he's looking to do and what he's running on. But we're going to try get more people on the podcast to kind of switch it up a bit, so it's just not me and Ramon screaming at each other. Ramon successfully got out to a couple rallies and interviewed some people. We had Damani Farley on in one of our earlier episodes. And, I'm truly the believer that, it's important to be involved in your local politics, because that's where you can really get change that'll affect you, more quickly than you're looking at the Chiron
year-long reconciliation process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got some comments on the stream. Your mom said, Melissa Brown said, politics as usual.
Yep.
I think
cards wear of money. I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
I think the cat walked across the keyboard on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Autocorrect, folks. Autocorrect.
But she's right. Politics as usual is definitely correct. All right. Well, this was fun. Memorial weekend. Hope everyone has a safe Memorial Day weekend. Memorial weekend?
Memorial Day weekend.
Memorial Day weekend. Yes. It's going to be shitty weather, so I don't know if that's going to stifle anybody's plans. It's cold today. It's weird, and it was beautiful the last week where I was wearing shorts, but now I go outside and I don't know, to grab a jumper or a umbrella or whatever.
I liked it. I didn't mind it. It was a nice switch up.
Yeah, I just put the ACs in yesterday.
Yeah, my house gets hot though, man. That's
Yeah.
Cool weather is appreciated.
All right, well, I don't have much else for you lads. That was enjoyable. Ramon, Always a pleasure. Join us next week. We might do something midweek where we get on and flap our gills a little bit. But appreciate you joining us as always. Please like and share. Tell your friends about it. This is, something that we enjoy doing. We definitely want to hear from you guys to see how you're liking it or disliking it, or if you have any opinion.
Yeah, come talk some shit if you don't agree.
Talk your shit. All right, Ramon, you got anything for him before we bounce?
That's it, man. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna definitely try to do something midweek because I have like a backlog of just things like what we kind of did in the beginning, like just funny stuff to talk on that we can just dunk on or critique real quick.
Yeah, I think that'll help.
We got a backlog right now.
That'll help. We need to just. We're trying to all dump it on the one podcast. It's tough. It just becomes like, oh yeah, what about this?